Today on Empowering Workplaces, we're going to be talking about best practices and advice for advancing your people analytics strategies with Ian O'Keefe, founder and CEO of Icona Analytics, who has previously led people analytics teams at some of the most iconic companies in the world, including Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, and Google.
Welcome to Empowering Workplaces, a show for anyone who wants to make work better and more fulfilling. We're your hosts, organizational psychologist Sanya Lucina
and aspiring leader Guille Santana. Join us in today's inspiring conversation.
Welcome, Ian. It is so wonderful to have you join us today. You are somebody, goodness, if I think back when I met you, I've probably known you for almost a decade.
Oh.
And I know, maybe I should quantify that.
It's been such a good ride, son. It's good to finally be talking to you about this.
I know it's I've been such a huge fan of your work, and I've followed you between different companies and just everything that you've done. And I loved not only what you've done to advance people analytics inside the organizations where you work, but I think you're always so generous to share your knowledge, to share your passion with those around you. And it's always so lovely for me whenever your name comes up in conversation with our peers, like you can see their eyes light up. So I can see in their facial expressions just really the respect that our wider community has for you. So thank you so much again for joining us today. And I'm really, really excited for our listeners to learn from you as well. And for some of those that maybe haven't had the privilege of meeting you before, do you mind kicking us off, just telling us a little bit about what you're up to today, any of your passions, upcoming projects, anything that you want to share for our listeners to get to know a little bit about you?
Well, first of all, thanks for arranging this, Sonia. It's important for us to kind of share what we know and help the entire space elevate and raise all boats. So this is always a great way to spend time. So really, thanks. I'm honored to be here, and it's a pleasure. So for those who might be listening, a bit of me is that I've been in people analytics for 15 years or so, and I was a consultant before that at Deloitte and a few other places. So my arc is kind of management consulting, leading up to the global financial crisis in 2008 with impeccable timing when I joined a financial services firm, American Express, and got into a lot of org design work, and on the heels of the financial crisis, cost takeout work, which led me into more quantitative modeling, which led me into people analytics at Sears Holdings with the esteemed Dean Carter, and then at Google and JP Morgan and Amazon. And recently, last year, I started Icona, which is basically, we're an advisory consultancy, and the learnings, methods, capabilities, and approaches you take to build a people analytics team over the years has changed a lot, from large organizations that might build everything in-house to mid-sized, smaller orgs that would definitely be looking to create a blend of build, borrow, buy. And so I help companies do that. And I work with amazing partners, Question Pro being one of them, to flex and scale solutions when it would be behoove us to bring partners in as opposed to building them ourselves. So yeah, a little bit on me, and I'm excited to talk more about the space we both love, people analytics, today.
All right, thank you, Ian. Well, let's start our interview with a tough question. So, what are some of the biggest challenges you're seeing for those working with HR or people data today, regardless whether they are part of a formal people analytics team or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the biggest challenge is that there's a lot of instances where the structure of the HR org works against people, analytics leaders, and HR to understand how data is connected across your entire ecosystem of processes and programs. So the way I think about people analytics, I think about 4 pillars. I think about governance, which is basically those programmatic mechanisms and tools you have to define, acquire, manage access to data, principles to safeguard employee trust. How do you promote high velocity decision making? That's a very kind of programmatic layer that then works in with your second pillar, your infrastructure. So that's the tech stack. So how you store, compute, the pipelines you have, performance, security measures, and how you curate data from all these processes and programs into analytic ready data sets to then go into the third pillar, which is methods, the methods you have to dig into data to understand patterns, trends, insights, predictions, research. There's a lot of approaches you could take scientifically to teasing insight out of data. And the methods pillar is where I think we commonly associate people analytics. That's what they do. They're quants and they're researchers and they're DSs, or data scientists, right? But if you don't have those first two pillars in place, it makes analyzing data and deriving insight very painful and a very protracted process to then do the fourth thing, which is productize your people analytics. So create products, data artifacts that are intuitive, that are accessible, that don't require a lot of training, to package your insights into bite-sized bits, or into reports, or into self-service dashboards, or more complex would be into production interfaces with in-house applications. So you're nudging the right person at the right moment with the right insight at the right time. So governance, infrastructure, methods, products, those are four different but related domains with a number of capabilities within them, none of which any one person I've ever seen has gone to school and been deep in all of them, because they've kind of merged over time in the PA space. And generally speaking, as like data and analytics has become a mainstay in company decision making. So I think understanding all the component parts there and how to stitch them together and which parts to lean on when, given your objective, is probably the most difficult thing. That's a long answer to a short question, but
No, but it's a really important answer. And you said something that made me think around education for people analytics, or just one person not knowing all of it. And so I was thinking, when I was back in school, like people analytics wasn't even a thing yet. It's not something that we were talking about.
right.
And today, I think there's more of a conversation in our community around, like, if there's formal education around it, how do you become knowledgeable about it? And so let's say somebody like me is listening that's been, I don't know, out of school for, let's just roughly say 20 plus years. We won't maybe quantify exactly, but they want to learn more about people analytics. What are some ways you think would be good for them to grab knowledge? And what do you think are maybe some benefits or drawbacks? Like I actually struggle with this in my day-to-day life around being a generalist around different parts of the business, or maybe even these different, people analytics components that you're talking about, or being more of a specialist, but then surrounding yourself with experts in these different areas. So one, from the education standpoint, I guess, what would be your recommendation? And two, based on where you're seeing the level of people mature, or people analytics, like maturity programs today, would you recommend more of a specialist or a generalist path for somebody?
Yeah, let's unpack both of those. So on like the learning side, nowadays, as opposed to when Sonia, you and I were getting into this space, let's call it 10, 15 years ago, there weren't as many or any conferences that were well tracked with name brand organizations, and the number of articles and podcasts and webinars and books was much lower. And by the way, like higher ed has recently caught up. One way would be to dive into any number of resources out there on platforms like this to learn. Another way is to, frankly, reach out to people analytics leaders that are like in your neck of the woods, or in your sector, or in your industry, and compare notes. If you're, if you have an interest and you're in HR, but you're not quite like, cut from the analytics cloth, that's not a very difficult step to take, to just get a little bit closer to how this manifests in this org over here. And then another way is, organizations like the program Anna Tavis has created at Columbia, or Wharton, or Harvard has incorporated people analytics, and UVA has done the same into their business programs. So you're starting to see data science schools and business schools create electives and more content and curriculum. So if you're a little earlier in your career and you're still, in school or grad school and figuring it out, versus if you're out and working and it's like, what can I grab off the shelf, or what can I grab, over lunch? There's a lot available online, and in classroom settings nowadays too. And go to a conference. You can have a power 3 days and learn a lot. On the second piece. So what was the second question? Remind me. I got all wrapped up in that.
I know I asked a lot in one. So the generalist versus the specialist.
Oh yeah. So I think that I'll give a 2-part answer. The teams that I've led and built have teammates that cover data engineering, that cover kind of your more like SQL analyst-based activities like drilling in and querying into data, IO psychology, data science, applied science, econometrics. So chances are you're coming into a people analytics team earlier in your career, especially in one of those areas. Like you're not like very broad across 1, 2, 3 X of them. Whereas as you start to deliver in some of those areas and you start to see the adjacencies in those areas and you might start leading a team, you're going to be increasingly generalized. You could stay narrow and specialized, but I think personally, as you see more of where like business objectives meets up with strategy, meets up with the capabilities to deliver, it's helpful to understand the connective tissue between a number of very deep capabilities from like a GM generalist standpoint, which is to say, I think it helps to have both in a company, kind of like that classic T-shaped practitioner. I got a degree from Northwestern in data science, and I went to a UVA for an undergrad in psych. So I'm pretty deep in those areas, but I'm not a trained engineer. I know enough about the tech stack to be able to understand what we need to do, but what would take me 3 days to code, a good DS or a data engineer can do in like 3 hours. And that's what you want. You want to hire someone that can technically run circles around you in areas that you know enough to be dangerous, but you're just not going to be as productive as someone else. So.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and it's probably similar in a lot of organizational progressions, I guess. Like you were saying, like you get into a specialist area and then you start to grow, you learn more of the business, and then you can have more of that oversight. I would ask you like 10 more questions related to that, but I'll skip to a different topic. We can see if we do a side. As you keep talking, I'm like, oh, I want to know more. I want to know more.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you, and I think this it's interesting because it depends on time as well. But one of the things that I try to do, I've talked about this a little bit over the last couple of days. I don't know why it's bubbled up, but like I'm a horrible person to like thrive on learning from failure. I know I should. I get it. Like the bigger risks you take, the bigger gains. Like I get mentally, I get it, but I think still a lot of my upbringing and everything, I'm like, oh, better to be safe. And so, anyways, while I work on that personally, one of the things that I like to do in the meantime, still, and I think I'll continue to do, is talk to people and learn from things they've done. So one of the things that you've seen, or maybe like whether it's you or somebody you worked with or a whole other organization, it doesn't matter, but as people are speeding up, and I know like in my business I'll think, okay, if I can avoid a mistake, to not have to, like, if others have learned from this, so I don't have to do it and learn from it myself, so I can make a different mistake maybe that nobody's made yet, and then others can learn from me. What are some things maybe that you've gone or again seen in your career, whether it's your others, where you're like, wow, this is something we've done or somebody else has done, that I'd like to share with others so they can avoid it in the future. So maybe, they can save themselves from that mistake or that learning and make a different kind or their own.
Yeah, a good fail, a fail forward kind of thing.
Yeah.
Well, I guess your question makes me think. You don't want to wake up in the morning and set out to make a mistake. Also, like I think it's equally bad to not be pushing yourself or your team or your project or your thinking far enough so that like you're maybe operating on the edges of your ignorance a little bit, because then you're pushing it and you're breaking new ground in solving a problem. So there's a balance there for sure. So I wouldn't set out to make a mistake, but I also wouldn't be afraid to make one, as long as like you've got some guardrails in place to know that the problem you're solving and the way you're doing it and the approach you're taking with stakeholders doesn't have like critical points of failure where you might just blow a hole in the side of the ship and everything sinks. Like, these are some obvious things. So I think scoping and understanding, like Eric Ries, we've all read The Lean Startup, right? Eric Ries wrote this in 2011, and a principle that he put forward was think big, start small, scale fast, right? And I think that's a great tenet to bear in mind, knowing that if you're doing a first of kind, the learning that I've had is first of kind initiatives will be bumpy, and the mistake you'll make is planning, scoping, and then planning forward towards, say, a launch date, assuming there's a perfect set of conditions that won't fluctuate and something won't happen that is unforeseen that will mess you up. So it's awkward and kind of tough to plan for the unexpected and to say, I'm going to build 20% buffer in here because something's going to go wrong that we don't quite know what it is yet, but this is a first of kind, and we're pulling data from different systems and looking at it in new ways, and we have to get by it. And this is going to be harder than we think. I bet. I hope I'm wrong. I might deliver earlier than expected. So I think that's a tough one because odds are there's heightened expectations. There's excitement on this initiative, and you want to deliver it quickly. And well, we could do this by, you compound all that and you're delivering, 6 weeks of stuff in a 4-week package or 8 weeks of stuff in a 6-week package. And if you lose a week because something comes out of nowhere, which it always does, you are now taking twice as long as you committed to. So I think that's not such a people analytics learning, although it's relevant in people analytics. It's just like a project management. Be careful not to overpromise and underdeliver on first of kind initiatives, but especially initiatives that are technically complex in tricky data spaces that are that have multiple stakeholders and are highly emotive, like people analytics. It's like, you got to be careful with this stuff and take your time. But also, you can't go in the lab. The other learning is don't go away for 6 months in the lab and expect to come out with something beautiful and not have the world changed around you and the business to have moved forward. So I think it's all kind of productive tensions in that, and there's a balancing act. But if you have a great idea of how to use people analytics to solve a problem, and it could apply to this massive segment of workers over here or this entire business, I would challenge anybody to start smaller than you think is applicable, maybe smaller than you would think is comfortable. Like, we could do this for everyone. It's like, no, go small, learn, get feedback, bump along, and like control that splash radius, and then scale from there and do multiple revs rather than like one big swing at the plate. You get it wrong, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And just to even echo the last bit that you said, I remember sometimes being like more on the technology end. I know I've talked to some of my leaders and they're like, oh, we don't want to do a pilot with a company. We want to sell everything. But then on the other end, I'll go and I'll talk to my friends who are doing work like in performance management are different. And they're like, no, but we're even piloting this inside of our organization. So we're not necessarily going to invest in something huge until we know a certain process works. And so for me, it was always that interesting communication, because oddly enough, most of my leaders, now that I think about it, have not come from an HR background or HR knowledge. And so I would have to bridge that gap between like, hey, this is what's happening with people analytics teams. This is what's happening on HR teams. And like, this is actually how they are approaching their work as well. So that smaller pilot that you were saying, and I do agree, because there's something about like under promising and over delivering, but like it is just incredible how tough timelines are. Like I feel like in life, it's very rare that somebody's like, oh yeah, like we really exceeded and we beat this timeline and we delivered everything perfectly ahead of time. Said almost no one ever, right? But like, oh, we're delayed by X months. And so again, to have that balance, to know to go in eyes wide open. And like you said, I think that's generally true for everyone. But I think also in people analytics, a lot of times people are still looking to prove themselves. And a lot of times your stakeholders don't know the nuances and don't know, like I remember earlier in my career, I was working for a company, was building a technology that was similar probably to one model in Vizier. And it was incredible how complex it was to pull the data from different systems. Like so much so that for us at one point we said it's not worth it. It's so difficult and every project is so delayed that we don't know how to build a business around it. And I'm so glad other people figured out how to. But when you're working with stakeholders who are interested in the outcome of your work, but not necessarily as familiar with the intricate nuances of how you can bring that work to life, to your point, like it's even more important to manage expectations and have some buffers. So that way somebody's not chasing you at the end. And then you find yourself almost like looking like, do I compromise the quality? Like, what do I do? Do I really delay this? Do I try to rush this? But then I risk making a mistake. Like, it's just not worth it.
Yeah, you make such a good point, and you're bringing me to a place of remembering like how important what I'll say empathy maybe is the right word to have as a people analytics leader, because you're probably leading a team of technical experts that are steeped in science and experimenting and getting it a little wrong and tweaking and adjusting and like acceptably failing is part of the process. The business of human resources historically has not been an experiment. Let's just test it. If we get it a little wrong, it's okay. It's not okay to get someone's pay a little bit wrong, or someone's benefits a little bit wrong, or someone's employment status a little bit wrong. So having empathy on like the problem you're solving in the group that you're solving it for, and where they might be just naturally rooted in expecting things to be right, like right-ish, 80%, 90%. It's like, no, 100.0%. That's what we want. And if that's not realistic from a data standpoint or from a confidence perspective, that's a conversation that has to be had and not sort of forced under time pressure. That like you need to look around that corner and know that that's coming. So.
Right. So now that we're talking about managing high expectations, and as you said, Ian, thinking big, starting small, knowing that most of us are working with limited time and limited resources, what are some things that you would recommend our listeners to focus on?
Yeah, great question. So I think I would recommend being very discerning about the decisions you make to build and staff for capability in-house versus buying capability from a third-party provider versus borrowing skill, time, capability from perhaps another science or research or analytics team that's inside of the broader organization that can lend you their expertise on a limited basis. So having sort of a mental model of build, borrow, buy, knowing where you are as a people analytics org capability wise, like what don't you need to borrow or buy because you've built it already, or you have real strength in engineering and kind of basic dashboarding and reporting and analytics, but you might need to look for external talent for data science and buy and partner with a third party for listening research and analytics, as an example, if that's something that you need to go deep on. So I would think about skills and capabilities that you can action and basically activate through those three levers. And then based on where you are in the PA team, in HR, and in the enterprise, what's the right mix on the right timeline to get the objectives that you want, given the priorities that you have in the different spaces where you can make an impact, whether it's recruiting, talent, comp, listening, learning, leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of a big Rubik's Cube, if you will, that you need to, I think you're not going to know the answer off the bat, but you need to know the dimensions that you're considering and how to evaluate them and play call around them in a way that makes sense on the timeline and in the budget is going to be really important.
Yeah, I agree with that. And sometimes it's also where you are on your journey, where I've seen so many companies build something and then in the end they're like, okay, we're done. We're buying now. But for a while, building was probably okay with them because, again, given the resources they had and maybe level of maturity where they were, they didn't need something really sophisticated. And when their need became more advanced, then they said, okay, we can buy. So I think it's one of those decisions around where you are at the moment, and also realizing that whatever decision you make, you don't have to be with it forever. Like at some point you can change your mind, but still evaluate intelligently, because you don't want to revisit that decision in like 6 months or in a really short time frame where it's like, oh man, we just invested a significant time of money and resources into something that we could have approached differently.
Yeah, your portfolio will evolve, and your point, Sonia, not to be lost, is like you might, as a leader of a PA team, need to make some, maybe it's like not a very popular decision to go with, we need basic capability and we're going to focus on basics now. And that might disappoint some of your researchers or data scientists who we could do X, Y, and Z with this data. It's like, yeah, but we shouldn't, because that's is right for the business. And that's not a very fulfilling place to be if you want to work in advanced methods. And 80% of the need is like, we need to nail the foundation. That's what we're focusing on. We will grow into a more advanced stature and maybe we'll pilot and light up some fireworks throughout the year along those lines, but that's not going to be the bulk of our focus. And so just knowing how to look at that in a clear-eyed way and not put a very advanced practitioner on a very simple problem is the art of it too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I have to ask you about Gen AI because I feel like there's no conversation that happens these days without it, right? So we can't finish out this conversation and not ask you. So based on some trends that you're seeing today, what do you think are just some examples that organizations are using Gen AI in a positive way, in a helpful way inside of their people analytics departments?
Yeah, I think Gen AI in the context of HR, what I see and hear and kind of pick up from my conversations in the market, no one has a playbook yet. Everyone is sort of in experimentation mode and they're in use case identification, evaluation mode, most often in partnership with other central teams, whether it's like central analytics or the central tech organization. But companies by and large are trying to figure out the right problems to solve. And I also see, GPT-4, or it was GPT-3 then, when OpenAI launched ChatGPT in November of 2022, it wasn't to solve this business problem. It was a hammer that it's an amazing tool. It's like you probably use this tool to solve a lot of things, and it was launched as such. And now I think there's a risk of companies being allured by that and saying this could solve lots of things. It's like, that's probably true, but like, what's the problem that you're going to fall in love with and then use this as the right tool to solve for? And I think it's really important that, and I see teams, HR teams that are clear-eyed on this, looking to start small and say, let's use it to write job descriptions faster. Let's use it to summarize feedback in our 360 review process. Let's use it so informationally intensive workflows that involve a lot of manual drudgery and back and forth of synthesizing of information, documentation. LLMs are fantastic at taking like a super long form lit review, if you will, and turning it into something very digestible and inspectable. So understanding the problem that you want to solve based on workflows that have data characteristics that would be well suited for Gen AI to kind of overlay on top of, and then cut time down and give back, say, time for more creative, productive endeavors is the equation that I see working well. But again, it's very small, it's very experimental right now, and it's mostly organic, not like organization-wide adopted. Use Gen AI for this at all times. This is how we're going to change workflows and people's roles to do that. This is now your co-pilot and best friend. We're not there yet.
Oh, thank you. I think those are great examples.
Yeah.
So one more question, I know, before we're up on time. So of course, being an employee listening company, I had to ask you, what are maybe some recent innovative ways that you've seen companies use employee listening to make a bigger impact? Or if you haven't seen it, what are your ideas for what you would like to see companies do better when it comes to employee listening data?
Well, I wish I had a good benchmark on this. Maybe you do, Sonia, but I think that people analytics teams have less than 50% of the data they need to really provide comprehensive insights for managers and for people in teams. You think about the words that are spoken, the thoughts that go kind of unsaid. Listening, broadly speaking, is a way to capture new data streams that can interweave with other data that's more transactional in your data model. So I think when we think about listening, the way I wouldn't think about it anymore is that's something we do once a year. That happens in February, and you learn about what they said in June, and you do something about it in August. You know, it's like you take a weather report in winter and do something about it in the summer. It's like that ritual still matters, but I think moreover, democratizing the ability to listen into the hands of many in the org who know their teams well, say managers, is an approach I've seen some listening teams and experience management teams take. And then also doing that in a way that's always on. Of course, we've talked about always on listening before, but again, what's the right approach to tap into certain types of data and sentiment that is less frequent, maybe requiring annual asks versus quarterly, monthly, weekly, always on types of asks. I think mapping the data you'd get from those different timetables and the tools you need to do it to different types of actions that you could activate on those. If you learned something on Monday, what could you do by Wednesday? Probably not diagnose and lift manager sat across your entire org, but you might be able to change like an approval chain in a workflow that's very common and burdensome in ways that are unnecessary, but you won't do it if you don't know about it, and you don't know about it if you don't ask. And so I think there's some order of operations there. And then also there's probably just a philosophical divide perhaps to overcome of, if you ask something as an organization, you're kind of bound to do something with it, right? So I think orgs sometimes may avoid doing that because there isn't a way to activate and solve and solution what they might hear to be a problem, and that's a lot of things. But I think that's something that needs to get. We need to get over the line on that one, and listening is the way we can do it. So.
Well, thank you, Ian, for that. As we wrap up our episode, are there any other learning or advice that you'd like to share with our listeners before wrapping up?
No, I think the things that I would just impress upon everybody, and it's what I like to do too, is just this people analytics has evolved a lot over the past 10, 12 years. There's so many things about it that are still exciting and evolving and changing, with in-house teams, with third-party teams, with consultants in academia. Just be a student of the space, be curious, and if you learn something new, don't keep it a secret. Create a rising tide for everybody, and I think that's how we'll get better. So that would be my parting thought.
Oh, thank you, Ian, so much. It's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you. Again, we're so grateful for your time. For our listeners that would like to get in touch with you, maybe learn more about what Icona Analytics does, where's the best place for them to find you?
I'm all over LinkedIn nowadays, so LinkedIn is a good place to spot me. But also, if you want to check us out on iconaanalytics.com, feel free to drop in and shoot me a line that way, and happy to have a chat.
Well, thank you so much again. This was such an enlightening conversation. I always enjoy talking with you, and it was so nice now for Guy and me to have an opportunity to share this conversation with all of our audience. So thanks a million for your time, and can't wait to see you again soon.
Pleasure's mine. Thanks so much, Sonia and Guy. Appreciate it.